everyone, welcome to After Class with Ballet for All,
a podcast by two passionate adult ballerinas about all things adult ballet related.
and some random thoughts in between.
We're so glad you're here.
So grab your water bottle
Or a cup of coffee.
and join us for a quick chat after class.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the After Class podcast with Ballet for All. Today, we are going to be talking about how to create the best arabesque line for your body. We're going to focus on three things: stability, strength, and aesthetics. So let's get into it. Hi, Elena.
Hello. Very excited about this episode today. I think that there is this massive misconception about doing arabesque in ballet. So I'm very excited to talk about this topic.
Yeah, me too. I think the arabesque position and the lines that it creates are such a classic pose in ballet. Sometimes I feel like it's that position that even people that don't know ballet, if you were to be like, oh, be a ballerina, that's the position that someone goes into, even if they've never taken a ballet class in their life. It's just such an iconic pose. And like you said, I think there's a lot of misconceptions about what is needed to achieve a really beautiful arabesque line. I think, so much of what we see on social media and then even just watching, professional productions is the arabesque. It was very extreme, like the back leg will be really high. And so we kind of can think as adults, oh, I can't do that, so my arabesque is never going to look good. But today we're going to talk about ways that you can make the best arabesque line for your body, which can be really, really beautiful, even if it needs to be lower.
Yeah, exactly. I love this one. I will say, as we said at the beginning of the podcast, to focus on three main characteristics of it. First of all, we need to work on our supporting leg and stability and control and balance. If we do not have a stable supporting leg, we will never be really comfortable on lifting the second leg off the ground to whatever height, which could be 20, 10, 190 degrees off the ground. So it all depends on your own level, on your own, I wouldn't call it limitations, I would call it on your own flexibility and your own anatomy. So I would say let's begin talking about the stability and balance. When we talk about arabesque, we don't need to do it on releve. So just flat, nothing else. If you want to adventure later on at releve, perfect. But today we're going to talk about just creating a stability in your supporting leg. And the main goal would be to use your foot as a tripod. There will be a point between your big toe, little toe, and your heel. If you think about that triangle, we call it a tripod in ballet. If you think about that triangle and dividing your entire balance between these 3 points, so you're not too much on your heel, not too much on your toes, but right in the center of this triangle, that will be like the perfect stability to begin with. And then it's just strengthening your supporting leg, elongating, and always feeling lifted off the ground. So I think that would be, what else do you think, Hannah, about that supporting leg?
Yeah, the tripod position is so important. And I think too, for anyone that has maybe a little bit of hyperextension, you're gonna want to shift back in your heel. Like I know for me, I have a little bit of hyperextension. And so what that translates to for me is that I feel a lot more comfortable sitting back in my heels than I should. And so I have to be constantly thinking more of going towards my toe. You might have the opposite problem where you're too much on your toes and you need to put a little bit more back in your heel, but just that picture of the tripod I think is so helpful for creating the stability and the feeling of being really rooted on the floor. I think also too, part of stability, and I know we've talked about this in my private lessons, is lifting up your arch, because if you're someone who tends to roll in towards your arch and kind of want to collapse in like that, you're going to lose a lot of stability by not being pulled up all the way in your arch. So I think that's another really important part of that stability piece.
Definitely. So after all the confidence you gain with a good supporting leg, great stability and balance, you need to have a strength to maintain that at least for a few seconds. And I will say there is so much more we can talk about strength for an arabesque, from the hips to the backs to the supporting leg and calves. But if you focus on back and glutes strength, just a little bit, now and then you do a little bit of a back exercises for strengthening, and then glutes, which will add, just immediately thinking of glutes, they are directly connected to your hips flexors. So that would be just about perfect for you to begin with developing a strength for your arabesque.
Yeah, I think it's so important to talk about glutes when talking about getting a strong arabesque, because I think when we think of arabesque or we just look at an arabesque, we tend to think about the work that's taking place in our backs and in our low backs. But really, if you can shift even just your focus when you're lifting that leg to putting the work more in your glutes, I think it makes it a lot easier on your body as a whole. Like, yes, it's hard work for your glutes, but for me, I know I've mentioned I have lower back issues, which I think is fairly common in adult dancers. And so if that's you, especially really thinking about putting the work more so in your glutes anytime you're lifting your leg to the back, it's really going to take a lot of the pressure off of your low back. I was actually just talking to someone in my in-person class about this, because it's very sweet. She was actually complimenting me. She's like, "You have such a nice arabesque line." And I was actually really surprised by that, because I'm like, I know it's not that high, but it was nice to hear that it looked good. And I think it's because over the last few months, especially, I've really been trying to work on my glute strength and thinking about activating my glutes every time I'm lifting that leg. And I really do think it's made a difference. And one of the things I was telling her is that I had to really figure out a way to shift the work out of my low back, because doing arabesques was creating pain for me every time I was doing it. And I think it's because I was doing it incorrectly, essentially, because I was putting way too much of the focus into my low back, and I was making my low back do way too much work. And so arabesques were becoming painful. And after I would do them, I would feel like my back was acting up. If I did a class that we did multiple arabesques, I would really feel it. And so making that conscious effort to shift the work into my glutes, I think not only improved the way it looked aesthetically, but it actually has improved my own comfortability and safety, even in being able to do them, because I don't feel pain in my low back anymore. So all that to say, I think the glutes component is so important, and it's very often overlooked.
Yeah, definitely. I was just researching a little bit, and this physio was talking about how much dancers we focus on that flexibility and hyperextension from everywhere, rather than activating the glutes, which are actually the muscles that will sustain and hold that position for a little bit longer. That is definitely the key, and I'm so glad, Hannah, that someone noticed, which I think that that's why topics like this one are so great, because it's not just me. Like, everybody like, oh my God, you've been doing ballet your entire life, so of course you make it look like easy, but it's true. Like, it worked, and someone else noticed on you. Like, you found that focus on that glute rather than just putting all the pressure on your lower back.
And I think it really emphasizes the value of cross training, because in order to have strength in my glutes, to have a better arabesque, or in order to have increased core strength, to have a better arabesque, whatever it is that you need to increase your strength to be able to improve your arabesque, cross training is going to be such an important part of that. Like, I think so often as dancers, it's like we want to just work on dance things to improve our dancing. But when you are willing to introduce a level of cross training to things like glute work, core work, sometimes it's not as fun. I think as dancers, we tend to like the music and the choreography and just everything that comes with a dance class. But I think having the cross training component added in is such a great way to see payoff in things like an arabesque. So yeah, the strength part of this is so important. What about the third thing?
The third thing would be the aesthetic part. That will be the pretty part that we're looking for. And I will begin by saying, and I keep telling this to all of my students, and it doesn't matter the height, but if your back leg is straight pointing down to the floor, your toes are having this straight line directly to the floor behind you, rather than having a line all the way to the diagonal and the horizon behind you, the line will look like short. It wouldn't be like sustained and lifted and elongated. So don't point straight down. Use your toes to point diagonal behind you, and that will give you more sense of elongation.
Yeah, like that feeling of reaching with your toes rather than thinking of lifting it up from the ground. That feeling of reaching away from extending. And that feeling too, I am someone who chronically struggles with thinking that their leg is straight when it's behind them, when it's not. And that feeling of reaching is, I think, really what helps with that.
I was going to talk about this later after I finish talking about the feeling and the position of the fingers and arms. But when we do arabesque, at least the Cuban Ballet School explains the arabesque as a line that goes between your toes, and you need to feel that your fingers, someone is pulling you through your fingers away right in front of you, and that same pulling away goes through your toes. So someone is pulling you forward and someone is pulling you backwards at the same time. So you feel like you're keeping extending and elongating. Like that's something that exists in ballet constantly, that contraposition of energy. Even when you do your demi-pliés, you are lifting at the same time, you're lowering, right? So you need to feel like you are lowering, someone is pulling you down at the same time, someone is pulling up. And that is the same with your arabesque. So that's what you have to feel with that back leg. That someone is trying to pull you through your toes, not down to the floor, but diagonal behind you, while you're opposing that and lifting forward. Yeah, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it definitely does. And the thing that I find so interesting about that is that it's really helpful for balance too. It's not just one of those things that we do it that way because that's the technically correct way to do it. It also really helps with balance. Like I know my in-person classes, I know for RAD in different schools, the arms of your arabesque are a little more squared off, but the other class that I take is a little more like Cicchetti style. And so the shoulder's a little more open to the arm is reaching back. And it's so interesting because sometimes our teacher will tell us when we're doing a penché in arabesque, if you start to feel like you're wiggling, if you think about reaching that back arm, it actually it helps to stabilize you because you're not just tipping forward, because your weight's going forward. So you have to think of how to counterbalance it, and you counterbalance it by reaching in the opposite direction. So like you said, that idea of opposing forces is such a big part of just ballet in general, because even doing a plie, right? It's like you're going down, but you're thinking of pulling up. The same thing with arabesque, but just on the horizontal plane.
Horizontal, yeah.
Yeah, it's forward and back. So you have to think of both things happening at once, because that's really how you maintain balance, is by countering it with the opposite part of your body, essentially.
Definitely. So I will say the next point about the aesthetic part, it's focus on those fingers of the front arm. Yeah, most of the time when we have the arm in front of us, let's talk about both, actually. You have your two arms. One is going to always be in front of you and the other one by your side. Something that we keep saying in terms of lifting is feel like your fingertips are reaching in front of you and beside you, so the walls in front of them, rather than reaching down to the floor again because we want to be lifted. Think about having those fingertips right diagonal in front of you and right to the diagonal beside you. So don't let them drop. There is an energy that flows out of your fingertips. It's not just out of the fingers, but the fingertips. Imagine that they are touching, reaching directly in front of you to that wall. Thinking of that, it also gives you that finish line, the reaching up, lifting, elongating.
One thing that kind of just popped in my mind, we didn't even talk about discussing this, but I think it's probably a question that most adults would have, because I think, kind of going back to what we were saying at the beginning of the episode, based on whether pictures you see on social media or seeing professional dancers with the back leg being up so high, like 90 degrees or higher, I think the temptation for adults can be compromising the position of their chest to get the leg higher. But what would be the most technically correct and also aesthetically pleasing amount of adjustment that you can make with your chest in order to get your leg higher, if that makes sense? Because I think that's the struggle for a lot of adults, is like, how much do I let my chest moving dictate how far I can get my back leg up?
I will say, really, don't adjust your chest, because then you're just letting all that strength that you work for to just shift slightly forward, not being activated anymore. So just think about your proud chest. Think about that line and long leg behind you lifting, but you can use a little bit. So rather than dropping your chest, use a little bit your hip to rotate that leg in a way that is giving you range of motion behind you rather than just dropping your chest. Open a little bit your arabesque rather than being super square from the hips. Open that hip a little bit, but don't drop your chest, because that's what is going to give you always that elongation, body alignment on lifting. Because as soon as that, the line that I always ask you to have, the proud chest with the diagonal line going from your chest, diagonal in front of you, would be then diagonal down. So we want to keep all those lines where they go. Your toes diagonal behind you, reaching behind you. The chest is proud, diagonal in front of you. So it is an arch. It's just a proud chest that is going to just bring all that energy diagonal in front of you. Now, if you shift the body weight, hips over the toes of the supporting leg, that will also allow you to lift that leg a little bit higher.
And I think it's interesting too, because one thing I've noticed both on myself and then just observing other adults in class is I think you can actually achieve a much prettier line and aesthetic sometimes by coming down a little bit and looking more comfortable in the position. I think sometimes in fighting for that height, we start to look strained and uncomfortable, and that visually translates, like people, whether it's just us looking at ourselves or someone else looking at ourselves, or a teacher, whoever, if you're performing the audience, you can see the strain. And I think sometimes lowering the leg and making it look more comfortable and more enjoyable to be in the position rather than looking like trying to get the leg up can actually really improve the look of it. So sometimes I think in ballet, it's like we're so programmed to just fight and struggle through because we're like, ballet is hard, everything is hard. But sometimes give yourself permission to back off a little bit and find a slightly more comfortable height where you can really focus on extending the line and fully straightening your leg and looking less strained in the position.
Yeah. And again, these are all tips to make you feel comfortable and confident on lovely arabesque. I think that there is so much in ballet that we can actually modify. And I wish everyone who is listening to this podcast could understand how difficult is that for me. I come from a very old school, very old traditional ballet school where they use lighters behind my leg so I could reach higher and higher, where they had needles. He was like, if you lower your leg, I'm going to poke you with a needle. So trust me, I've been working on this for a long time.
Yeah, we're not about psychological or physical abuse on this podcast. So we're going to give you the healthy ways, mentally and physically, to achieve your goals, not by tormenting you like old school ballet teachers.
It's so hard for me. Like, how do I battle against what I have been told my entire life? How do I teach the opposite? Like, how do I teach you to enjoy an arabesque?
It's so true, though. I think, I mean, we should honestly just do a whole podcast episode about this, because a book I'm reading right now, the author's referencing some things in her training that were just so unhealthy. And I think it's got to be such a struggle as someone who grew up in that system. It's almost like deprogramming yourself from these teaching styles that are really kind of toxic. But like it was so ingrained in you that this is the way you learn, and like this is the only way to achieve your goals. Work through injuries and have the teachers yelling at you and telling you you're fat. I feel like there's a whole generation of teachers now that are becoming the new generation of teachers that are having to deprogram themselves.
Yeah, we have kind of to unlearn what we learned. It's been so hard for me, and I don't have it all figured out yet with adults, and I learned so much, and I love all of my private lessons are so interesting. I have so many different age students, and all of you have different questions. And for me as a teacher, that is the fun part of teaching. You get to ask me questions that to me might not be, I haven't thought about those questions like, oh, wow, that's right. That actually looks natural, or to me makes a lot of sense because with my 20 plus years background on ballet. But All of you, my students just make the best questions ever, and I love it. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm learning with this question because I learned to explain in different ways. It's learning constantly, and I love it.
Well, was there anything else for arabesques, or should we bring this one to a close?
I think that if you all work in a little bit of simple stability and control for your supporting leg, create a little bit of a strength routine for glutes and back. And then you just focus on elongating and reaching for the aesthetic part and smile, you will have the best arabesque.
We really hope this was helpful and practical because I think arabesque is, like we were saying at the beginning, it's such a classic ballet position. And my hope for any adult dancer is that it can be something that you can see yourself do it in the mirror and just have a moment where you're really happy with how it looks and you're enjoying it because you're getting to see ballet on your own body, whatever that looks like.
Exactly.
And, if whether it's a high leg, a low leg, whatever, you can make it beautiful in the body that you're in. I really believe that.
I can't wait to see all of your arabesque. If any of you are brave enough or just want to share your arabesque on your Instagrams and your social media, just tag me or Hannah. We would love to see.
That'd be so fun. Yeah, post your arabesque and tag us. We would love to see your arabesque.
Definitely.
So, thank you guys so much for listening to this episode, and we will see you on the next one.
See ya. Thank you for listening to After Class with Ballet for All.
Join the community on YouTube and Instagram, or come dance with us, our weekly Zoom classes for adult ballerinas like you.
Links included in the episode description. Special thank you to our sponsors.
See you next time after class. Podcast produced by Mission Bridge Media.